My husband watched my car fall off a cliff. He believed I was dead. 3 weeks later, I walked into his charity gala alive. The scream he made stopped the entire ballroom. But to understand why he screamed, you need to know what happened on that mountain road. Before we go back to that night, if you enjoy intense betrayal and revenge stories where the truth finally comes out, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I share powerful stories like this every day. The car slammed through the guardrail. Metal screamed as the front wheels left the road. My stomach dropped. For 1 second, everything went quiet. Then I saw my husband. He was not panicking. He was not even trying to stop the car. Instead, he calmly reached down and unlocked his seatbelt. My heart stopped. "What are you doing?" I shouted. He didn't answer. He opened his door. Wind rushed inside the cabin as the tires lost the road completely. Then he jumped. He jumped from the moving car and rolled across the pavement while I was still trapped inside. Our eyes met for one frozen moment through the cracked windshield. The look on his face wasn't fear. It was relief. The car tipped forward. The cliff swallowed the road beneath me. I grabbed the wheel, screaming his name as the car flipped into the darkness. Glass exploded around me. The world spun violently. Metal crushed inward. I heard the engine roar, then the crack of trees as the car rolled down the ravine. My chest slammed hard against the seatbelt. Everything hurt at once. Then the car stopped with a violent crash at the bottom. Smoke filled the air. Fire flickered near the hood. My ears rang as I struggled to breathe. Far above on the road, a shadow stood near the broken guardrail. My husband. Watching. Then I heard his voice drift down through the dark. Finally, and everything went black. Pain woke me before the flames did. My head throbbed like someone was hammering it from inside. The air tasted like gasoline and burned rubber. I tried to move, but my ribs screamed in protest. The seatbelt had locked tight across my chest. Outside the broken windshield, smoke curled upward into the dark sky. Fire crackled under the hood, spreading quickly. I forced myself to breathe slowly, think, move. My fingers shook as I reached for the buckle. For a terrifying second, it refused to release, then it clicked open. The moment the belt snapped free, my body collapsed sideways. Agony shot through my arm. Something was definitely broken. The fire was growing now. Orange light crawled across the crushed dashboard. If the fuel tank caught fire, the car would explode. I pulled myself toward the broken window. My legs barely cooperated. Blood dripped from a cut above my eye. Above the ravine, the road was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, no sirens. My husband had not called for help. A wave of cold understanding moved through me. This crash had never been an accident. The car popped loudly as flames spread closer. Smoke burned my throat. My vision blurred at the edges. I reached the window frame and started pulling myself through. Then my strength gave out entirely. The last thing I heard was heavy footsteps running hard across the rocks toward the wreck. Then darkness took everything. Voices pulled me back from the dark. "Hey, stay with me." The voice was old but steady. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. Cold night air brushed against my face. I was no longer inside the car. Someone had already dragged me out across the rocky ground. "Good, she's breathing," the voice said again. I forced my eyes open. A blurry face leaned over me. A gray beard. Deep lines across weathered skin. Calm, steady eyes watching carefully. "You're lucky," the man said quietly. "Another 60 seconds and that car would have blown." Behind him, the wreck exploded with a deep rolling boom. Heat washed hard across the rocks. I flinched weakly. "Easy, don't move." "Woo? Where?" My voice barely worked. "Bottom of the ravine. My name is Arthur. I live in a cabin half a mile from here." He pressed a folded cloth against the cut on my forehead. "Spent 30 years as a mechanic before I retired up here. I know a bad wreck when I hear one." My mind struggled slowly to piece it all together. The crash, my husband's hand reaching for the seatbelt buckle, the jump, the cliff. "Did someone call for help?" I whispered. Arthur frowned quietly. "No one came. No sirens, no voices from above, just me and that fire." My chest tightened. My husband had not called the police, had not called anyone, had simply walked away. Arthur wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and checked my arm carefully. "Broken ribs," he said, "and this arm needs setting before morning." The pain barely registered, because the truth hurt far worse. My husband believed I was dead, and for now, that might be the only thing keeping me alive. I woke in a small wooden cabin. Rough pine boards formed the ceiling above me. Sunlight pushed through curtains beside the bed. For one brief moment, I thought the crash had been a nightmare. Then my ribs reminded me it wasn't. Pain pulsed through my chest with every breath. My arm was secured in a wooden splint, wrapped with clean strips of cloth. An open first aid kit sat on the table beside the bed. Footsteps creaked across the floor. Arthur stepped in carrying a bowl of soup. "Still with us," he said gently. "How long?" My voice came out dry and thin. 3 days. 3 days. My heart knocked against my sore ribs. "What's happening out there?" I asked. Arthur hesitated, then set the bowl down and sat. "I drove into town yesterday. Checked the news." My stomach dropped. "And?" "The crash burned the car completely," he said. "But when you were thrown during the roll, your purse flew out before the explosion. Your wedding ring was found in the debris nearby. Authorities used both to identify you. Combined with the intensity of the fire, they declared you dead at the scene." The room went very still. "They think I'm gone?" I whispered. He nodded slowly and didn't look away. "The fire was hot enough that no remains were expected to survive. Your personal items were considered sufficient to confirm your identity." Somewhere out there, my husband was telling everyone how devastated he was, and he believed, without a single doubt, that he had committed the perfect crime. That afternoon, Arthur brought me a newspaper. My hands shook the moment I saw the front page. A large photograph showed the twisted, blackened remains of the car at the bottom of the ravine. Below it sat a picture of my husband, head lowered, surrounded by reporters. The headline read, "Billionaire Heiress Dies in Tragic Mountain Accident." Heiress. The word tightened something in my chest. Only 4 days before the crash, I had inherited $150 million. Within hours, my husband had transformed completely. Flowers every single morning, expensive dinners every night, a surprise weekend trip through the mountains. At the time, I thought he was celebrating my good fortune. Now I understood. He had been finalizing his plan. I forced myself to keep reading. Grieving husband states brake failure caused crash. Brake failure. That was the lie he was selling to everyone. My fingers gripped the paper tighter. Because I remembered clearly now. In the seconds before the car left the road, I had watched his hand move. Not toward the steering wheel, not toward the brakes, toward his seatbelt buckle. He had unlocked it calmly before the crash even began, which meant he knew exactly what was coming. The chill that moved through me had absolutely nothing to do with the cold cabin. This had never been an accident. It had been murder. And my husband believed the only living witness was already identified by a recovered ring. "My name is Evelyn Hart. 3 days ago, the world said I died in a mountain crash. Right now I sat in a wooden cabin with broken ribs, a fractured arm, and the truth burning inside my chest. My husband had tried to kill me." Arthur poured tea and placed the cup beside my bed without speaking. "I should rest," I said. "Yes," he replied quietly, "but I can't." Because every minute that passed gave my husband more ground. If the world believed I was dead, he would soon control everything. The money, the house, my father's company. $150 million. Arthur studied my face for a moment. "Thinking about the police?" I considered it, but something cold in my chest said not yet. If I walked in now, it would be my word against a man who had already built his story carefully. Brake failure, tragic accident, heartbroken husband. He had a full head start and a polished performance. No, if I wanted real justice, I needed real proof first. I picked up the newspaper and stared at the photograph of my husband performing grief for the cameras. "The town has internet?" I asked Arthur. Slow, but yes. A quiet plan began forming steadily in my mind. "Good," I said softly. "Because I am not dead, and before I walk back into that world, I need to understand exactly how my husband planned every step of this." Arthur nodded once and opened the laptop without another word. The next morning, Arthur helped me sit at the small desk near the window. His old laptop hummed quietly as it powered on. Every movement sent pain through my ribs. But I pushed past it. I had more important things to find than comfort. I searched the news coverage of the crash first. My stomach turned as the screen filled with identical headlines. Tragic, sudden, devastating. Photos showed my husband leaving the police station with reporters trailing behind him. His eyes looked red and swollen. His shoulders carried the full weight of a devastated man. It was a masterful performance. I kept scrolling slowly until something made me stop. A recorded interview. My husband stood outside our house speaking to a reporter on the front step. "I lost the love of my life," he said softly. His voice cracked perfectly on the last word. "I would give anything to bring her back. Anything at all." Arthur appeared behind me and glanced at the screen. "That man could win an award," he said flatly. Something cold settled inside me. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of trusting this person with my whole life. The interview continued. The reporter asked about the cause of the crash. My husband sighed slowly. "The mechanic confirmed the brakes failed suddenly," he explained. "There was nothing anyone could have done." Mechanic. The word sharpened my focus immediately. "Arthur," I said quietly, "I need to find out exactly who worked on our car last." "Someone helped him build this," Arthur agreed, pulling a chair close beside me. "And that person had left a clear, traceable trail behind them." It took nearly 20 minutes for the laptop to load the next article. The slow connection felt like torture. But when the page finally appeared, the words stopped my breath entirely. Life insurance. I leaned toward the screen and read carefully. A policy had been filed in my name just days before the crash. The named beneficiary was my husband. Arthur walked over and read quietly beside me. "That's convenient timing," he said. "It wasn't convenient," I replied. "It was planned." The policy value listed was $20 million. My hands began to tremble. He hadn't only wanted the inheritance, he wanted the insurance payout on top of it. 48 hours after the crash, the claim had already been submitted. Arthur folded his arms. That man wasted no time grieving. My chest tightened. To file that fast, he must have had everything prepared before we ever left home. Then Arthur found something else entirely, a video clip, posted just that morning. My husband stood outside a restaurant downtown, laughing with men in expensive suits. He held a champagne glass raised high. He looked like a man who had just won something enormous. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 days after my funeral. Arthur turned the screen toward me without a word. The grief performance had lasted less than a week. He was already living the life he had planned for himself. "We need to move faster," I said. Arthur closed the laptop and nodded. "Then we start digging tomorrow," he said. "If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and you won't miss the next story where justice takes an even bigger turn." Arthur helped me walk outside for the first time that afternoon. Fresh mountain air filled my lungs. Every breath still pulled at my ribs, but at least the pain reminded me I was alive. The ravine stretched far below the tree line. Somewhere down there lay the charred remains of the car that was supposed to be my grave. Arthur stood quietly beside me. "You're doing well," he said. "I don't feel like it." "You survived a cliff and a fire," he replied. "That counts for everything." When we came back inside, I opened the laptop again. This time I searched my husband's financial history. He had always enjoyed gambling, casinos on weekends, private card games midweek. I had noticed the habit, but never imagined how deeply it had grown. Then the records appeared on screen. Loans, court filings, private lenders. Thousands had become hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands had become millions. Arthur leaned in beside me. "Those are dangerous people to borrow from and not repay," he said quietly. My heart sank slowly as the numbers grew. The sudden romance after my inheritance. The surprise mountain trip. The quiet road at night. My husband hadn't only wanted my money out of greed. He had needed it desperately. People buried under that kind of debt stop thinking clearly. They think only about escape. Then Arthur tapped the screen. A new article had just appeared. My husband had already filed paperwork to access my inheritance account. "He's not waiting," Arthur said grimly. "Neither are we," I replied. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, the same sequence replayed itself. My husband's hand moving to the seatbelt buckle, his calm expression, the way he stepped out before the car left the road, without panic, without hesitation. Which meant he had rehearsed it long before that night. But one memory kept rising above the others. The evening before the trip, we had been in the garage while he loaded bags. A dark sedan I didn't recognize was parked in the driveway. When I asked about it, my husband answered too quickly. "Just a mechanic friend stopping by," he said, and changed the subject. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Then I remembered something else from that same day. Earlier I had driven to the grocery store. When I pressed the brake at the first traffic light, the pedal felt wrong. Softer than normal, like pressing against something that gave too easily. I mentioned it to my husband when I got home. He shrugged and said the car was perfectly fine. I sat up in the dark cabin. Arthur stirred in the chair across the room. "What is it?" "The brakes felt soft that day," I said, "and there was an unfamiliar car in our driveway that evening." Arthur went very still. "That's not mechanical failure," he said quietly. "That's deliberate tampering. Someone had prepared that car long before we ever left home, and somewhere out there, that person was still walking free." The next morning, Arthur drove into town for supplies. Before leaving, he handed me a small burner phone. "Don't use anything that connects back to you," he said. I nodded. The moment the door closed, I opened the laptop. I searched for repair shops near our house. A familiar name appeared immediately. The shop had serviced our car twice in the past 2 years. The owner's name sat at the top of the screen, Victor Hale. I scrolled through his shop's social media posts. Then one image stopped me cold. Victor stood beside a dark sedan outside his shop. The same dark sedan I had seen in our driveway the night before the trip. I kept scrolling. Then something else made me sit up straight. A photograph from several months earlier. Victor stood between two people at a private party. On his left was my husband, smiling broadly. On his right stood a woman, tall, dark hair, wearing a fitted black dress. She had one hand resting on my husband's arm. The familiarity between them was not professional. I didn't know her name yet, but the way she stood beside him, the way he leaned slightly toward her, told me one very clear thing. She was not just a colleague. Arthur returned just as I finished reading. "This man serviced our car the night before the trip," I said, "and I've seen that car before." Arthur studied the screen and slowly shook his head. That afternoon, Arthur returned from town carrying a fresh newspaper. This one hollowed my stomach completely. My husband's photograph covered the entire front page. He was standing beside my coffin. The funeral had already happened. I stared at the image in silence. Black suit, red eyes, one hand on the casket lid. He looked like a man shattered by loss. Arthur read the headline aloud. "City mourns beloved heiress after tragic accident." My own funeral, my own coffin, and the man who arranged every detail standing in the front row accepting condolences. But the smaller photograph at the bottom of the page stopped me cold. A woman stood behind my husband at the graveside. Tall, dark hair, her hand rested on his shoulder in a way that crossed the line between comfort and claim. It was the same woman from Victor's earlier party photo. She was not listed by name in the caption, but she had come to my funeral. "Arthur," I said quietly, "that woman was at our garage the night before the crash. I just didn't recognize her then." Arthur's expression hardened. "Someone paid for that conclusion," he said flatly, pointing to a line in the article. "The vehicle inspection confirms brake malfunction. Your husband made sure the inspector reached the right answer before he even looked." My jaw tightened. A mechanic to sabotage the car. A corrupt inspector to clear it afterward. A woman close enough to coordinate everything. Every angle carefully covered. But covered evidence and destroyed evidence are very different things. 2 days later, Arthur helped me climb carefully down the rocky path toward the wreck. Every step sent pain through my ribs. My breath came in short, controlled pulls. But I needed to see it myself. The car lay crushed among broken trees at the bottom of the ravine. The entire front section had been destroyed by both the impact and the fire. Most of the visible metal was scorched black. Arthur moved ahead of me. His 30 years as a mechanic prepared him for exactly this. He knew where fires burned hottest and where metal survived. "The fire started at the engine compartment," he said as we approached. The rear of the car had the frame between it and the main blaze. That section would have had protection. He crouched beside the rear wheel well and cleared debris with his hands. Then he went completely still. "Come look at this," he said. I crouched beside him slowly, ignoring the protest from my ribs. Arthur pointed to a metal tube running along the rear underframe. It had been cut. Not torn by impact, not corroded by age, not warped by heat. The edge was clean, precise, and deliberate. Arthur looked at me steadily. That cut was made by a tool, he said. No accident and no fire produces an edge like that. He pulled out his phone and photographed it from multiple angles. Real evidence. Something no paid inspection report could touch. For the first time since the crash, genuine hope moved through me. That night I watched another interview clip on the laptop. This one was different from the others. My husband looked calmer now. The grief performance was softening at the edges. He stood outside the company building speaking to reporters with quiet confidence. As difficult as this loss has been, he said slowly, I know she would want her legacy to continue. Arthur crossed his arms. He's settling in, he muttered. I nodded slowly. But something else in the frame had captured my full attention. Standing just behind my husband, slightly outside the camera's focus, was the same woman. Tall, dark hair, wearing a gray coat, she stood close to him, comfortable, familiar. And then the memory hit me with sudden, cold clarity. The night before the trip, the garage, the dark sedan in the driveway, my husband speaking quietly with Victor, and standing slightly apart from them, watching the road with her back partly turned, was that same woman. Now I recognized her completely. I searched her face against every memory I had of his professional life. Then it came. Lydia Carter. She had worked alongside my husband for years, visited our home more times than I had thought to question. I had assumed she was simply a trusted colleague. Now, watching the way she had positioned herself behind him on camera, just out of frame but close enough, I understood. She was far more than that. Arthur, I said. That woman is part of this. Then she's your way in, he replied. Over the following week my body continued to heal. The sharp pain in my ribs dulled to a steady ache. My arm grew stronger. Each morning Arthur helped me walk a little farther than the day before. But my mind never rested. Every evening I returned to the documents spread out across the cabin table. The brake line photographs, the insurance policy records, Victor Hale's repair history with dates, the footage of Lydia standing behind my husband on camera. Piece by careful piece, a clear picture assembled itself. Then Arthur returned from town one quiet evening with something new. You're not going to enjoy this, he said, placing a printed document on the table. Court filings. My husband had submitted paperwork to assume full legal control of my inheritance. I turned to the second page. A bank transfer. Recent. Substantial. Sent directly to an account under Lydia Carter's name. Payment, I said quietly. Arthur nodded. For helping him arrange everything. Then he placed a second page beside it. A photograph taken 3 days earlier outside an upscale restaurant. My husband sat across from Lydia at a candlelit table. Wine glasses between them, his hand over hers. Barely 10 days after my funeral. Arthur said nothing. He didn't need to. I had trusted this man with my entire life. He had been building a replacement the entire time. But the thing about careful plans is that they always leave careful trails. And I now had enough trail to follow all the way back to him. For the next 2 weeks, Arthur and I worked quietly, steadily, and without interruption. My body healed slowly. My plan sharpened with every passing day. Arthur helped me organize everything we had gathered into a clear, logical sequence. The photographs of the cut brake line from the rear undercarriage. The insurance policy filed days before the crash. Victor's repair records. The bank transfer to Lydia Carter. The restaurant photograph of my husband and Lydia together. Barely 10 days after my funeral. Each document felt like a solid brick in the wall I was building around my husband. One afternoon, Arthur looked up from the table. When do you go back? Not yet, I said. Not until the moment is right. He nodded slowly. Because he still believes you're gone. Exactly. My husband was relaxed now. He believed every threat had been permanently removed, which meant he was growing careless. And careless people make the kinds of mistakes that cannot be walked back. That evening, a new clip appeared online. My husband stood inside my father's office, addressing employees, shoulders back, head lifted, a man who had claimed his prize. He was no longer performing grief at all. I intend to honor her memory by leading this company forward, he announced. Arthur watched quietly beside me. The morning act was finished. He believed he had won everything. But very soon he was going to learn something he had never once considered. Some things that are buried have a habit of walking back through the door. Arthur returned from town the next morning carrying something small and useful. A voice recorder. He set it on the table in front of me without explanation. "You'll need this," he said. "For what specifically?" "To make them say the truth out loud." The idea formed quickly. Physical evidence told one part of the story. A recorded voice telling the rest would make the entire case undeniable. Confessions close doors that photographs leave open. Arthur sat down across from me. "Which one do you approach first?" I thought carefully. "Not my husband," I said. "He stays controlled under pressure. He'll deny everything and say nothing useful." Arthur nodded. "Victor? Not him either. He'll go quiet and wait for someone else to break first." My eyes moved to Lydia's name written across the documents. "She's the one," I said. "What makes her different?" "She took money," I replied. "People who take money convince themselves they aren't fully responsible. That guilt sits quietly inside them until pressure arrives. Then it cracks them wide open." Arthur studied me quietly. "You've thought this through carefully." "I've had 2 full weeks and a great deal of mountain silence." He slid a printed page across the table. "My husband would be attending a charity event at a downtown hotel in 3 days, a large public gathering. Lydia and Victor's names appeared on the same guest list, all 3 of them. 1 room. My heart beat steadily. In 3 days, a dead woman was going to walk back into the world. The drive back toward the city felt completely unreal. Arthur kept the radio off. The mountains shrank behind us as the road straightened and widened. Familiar buildings appeared against the horizon. 3 weeks ago, I had left this city as a living woman with a name, a home, and a future. Now the world had already buried me. Arthur parked 2 streets from the hotel hosting the charity event. "Last chance," he said simply. I shook my head. "Not tonight." The hotel entrance glowed under warm lights. Through the tall glass windows I could see guests arriving in expensive clothes. My father's company logo hung above the entrance on a banner. Arthur pressed the recorder into my hand. "Turn it on before you step inside." I clicked it on. The small red light blinked once and held steady. Then I stepped out of the car. With each step toward the entrance, my heartbeat grew steadier, more certain, more determined. No one at the door looked twice at me. To them, I was simply a guest, arriving a little late. They had no reason to look closely at a woman the world believed was buried. Inside, the ballroom hummed with music and conversation. I scanned the room carefully. Then I found them. Lydia stood near the bar speaking in a low voice to Victor. Their heads were close together, both of them in the same corner, both of them completely unaware of what was about to change. I straightened my shoulders and walked toward them. I was halfway across the ballroom when it happened. An older woman in a silver dress stepped directly into my path. She stopped. Her champagne glass hovered midair. Her eyes traveled slowly across my face, wide and unblinking. "Oh my God," she whispered. I recognized her. Margaret Holloway. A friend of my father's who had sat in the front row at my funeral. I pressed one finger firmly to my lips. She stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then she stepped aside without a word, her hand trembling. But 2 people nearby had noticed her reaction. Heads were already turning. I moved faster. Victor turned first. The moment his eyes landed on me, the color left his face entirely. The glass in his hand slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the music. Lydia looked up to see what had happened. When she saw me standing there, she made a sound that was not quite a word. Her whole body went rigid against the bar. "You," Victor whispered. "Yes," I said calmly. "It's me." The murmurs were spreading outward through the room like ripples across water. "That's impossible," Lydia managed. "Is it?" I stepped closer, keeping my voice low and steady. "You were paid well for your part in this," I said softly. The recorder in my coat pocket ran silently, capturing every word without interruption. "You helped arrange the sabotage of my car, the brake line, the night before the trip." "That's insane," Victor snapped, but his hands were shaking. Lydia's breathing had become fast and shallow. Her eyes swept the room desperately, searching for any way out. The pressure cracked her far quicker than I expected. "You told me she'd be dead," she suddenly screamed at Victor. The ballroom fell completely silent. Victor stared at her in absolute horror, and Lydia covered her trembling mouth far too late. For 1 long second, no one in the room moved. Then the chaos arrived all at once. Guests surged forward, phones lifted into the air. Voices broke from every direction. Someone near the back shouted my name, and the room erupted. Victor grabbed Lydia's arm hard. "We are leaving right now," he hissed. But security guards had already closed in from both sides. I stepped forward calmly. "Tell them the truth," I said. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "You promised she would never survive it," she cried at Victor. "You said the brakes would fail before the bottom." More gasps, more cameras, more voices rising. I pulled the recorder from my coat pocket and held it up. The red light blinked steadily. Arthur appeared near the entrance as arranged and gave me a single, quiet nod. The ballroom doors opened behind him. Reporters rushed inside with cameras raised. And then, through the far entrance, my husband walked in. His eyes swept the room with easy, familiar confidence. Then his gaze crossed the space and found me. His face turned completely white. The champagne glass in his hand fell and shattered on the floor. And the scream that tore from his throat filled every corner of that room. The scream my husband released was raw and animal. It was not grief. It was not joy. It was pure, undiluted terror. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward him. He stood frozen in the doorway with both hands gripping the frame, staring at me across the ballroom. I took one slow, deliberate step forward. "Yes," I said calmly. "It's me." His breathing came fast and broken. "You died," he said. "I watched the car go over that cliff." "You watched me go over," I replied. "That is a different thing entirely." Around us, reporters were shouting questions. Guests pressed closer. The room had become a courtroom and a storm. My husband's eyes darted to Victor. Victor stared at the floor. They moved to Lydia. Lydia was already crying into her hands. Then they came back to me. "This is a setup," he said, his voice cracking badly. I reached into my bag and placed a printed page on the table nearest to me. "The insurance claim you filed 48 hours after the crash," I said. A second page. "The bank transfer you sent to Lydia Carter." A third page. "The brake line photographs from the rear undercarriage of our car." Each page landed on the table with quiet finality. My husband took one step backward. The confident man who had stood in my father's office addressing employees just days ago had vanished completely. Erased in a single moment. What stood in his place now was something smaller. Cornered. Cameras flashed from every direction. 2 uniformed police officers stepped through the ballroom doors. The crowd parted without being asked. 2 hours before arriving at the hotel, I had placed a call from the burner phone. I told them what evidence I had gathered, where I would be, and what I believed was about to happen inside that room. They had listened carefully without interrupting. One officer approached Victor immediately. "Victor Hale?" Victor nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He lowered his head and walked forward without a word. The second officer looked at Lydia. She was already reaching toward the officer's arm. "I'll cooperate fully," she said through tears. "I'll tell you everything." Then both officers turned toward my husband. He raised his hands up quickly. "Whatever she told you," he said, nodding toward me, "this woman was badly injured. She's confused about what she saw." The officer's expression didn't change. "Sir, you are being investigated for attempted murder and insurance fraud." The words moved through the ballroom like a current. My husband laughed. It came out hollow and strange. "You cannot be serious," he said. The officer stepped forward without hesitation. My husband looked across the room at me one last time. His eyes were burning. "You planned all of this," he said quietly. I met his gaze without moving. "No," I said. "You planned all of this. I simply survived it." The handcuffs closed firmly around his wrists with a clean metallic click. He was still shouting when they walked him out through the ballroom doors. The ballroom erupted the moment the doors closed behind him. Reporters pressed forward with questions. Guests gathered in clusters, talking rapidly. The charity event had become something else entirely. Arthur appeared at my side quietly. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. He handed me a glass of water without another word. A detective approached about 20 minutes later. She introduced herself and asked if I was prepared to give a full statement. I handed her the recorder first. She listened to a portion of it, then looked up at me. "This is substantial," she said. "There's more," I replied. I gave her the printed photographs of the cut brake line. The insurance policy dated days before the crash. Victor's repair records. the bank transfer to Lydia, the restaurant photograph of my husband and Lydia together. Each piece passed from my hands to hers. She examined everything carefully without rushing. "You gathered all of this while the world believed you were dead," she said finally. "I had time, and I had reason," I replied simply. She almost smiled. The next several hours were long and procedural. Statements, questions, documentation. Victor confirmed he had been paid to cut the rear brake line. Lydia confirmed she had coordinated everything, the timing of Victor's visit, the travel route, the payment schedule. The recordings combined with the physical evidence left no version of events in which my husband's story could survive. By morning, the case was already being described as airtight. 3 days after the charity event, I sat in a quiet room at the detective's office. Outside the window, the city moved exactly as it always had. People walked dogs, taxis idled at lights. A street vendor arranged fruit on a cart near the corner. None of them knew what had unfolded in those mountains. The detective came in and sat across from me. "Victor Hale has formally confessed," she said. I nodded and waited. "He confirmed your husband approached him 6 weeks before the crash. Payment came in 3 separate installments. The final amount was transferred the morning after the crash, once your husband believed the job was complete." 6 weeks. He had been planning this for 6 weeks, while I sat beside him at dinner every single evening, completely unaware. "Lydia Carter has also provided a full statement," the detective continued. "What was her specific role?" I asked. "She coordinated the logistics, managed the timing of Victor's repair visit, confirmed your travel schedule, and ensured the route included the mountain road. She had watched me quietly from inside my own life for months. I had never sensed a thing." The detective leaned forward slightly. "There's one more thing." She slid a document across the table. 3 formal charges: attempted murder, insurance fraud, criminal conspiracy, combined sentencing exposure measured in decades. I looked at the paper for a long moment, then I looked up. "Thank you," I said quietly. The detective looked at me steadily. "You built this case," she said. "From a cabin in the mountains. You did the hard part." 3 months later, I stood inside my father's office. Late afternoon light came in long and gold through the tall windows. The city spread below in every direction. This was the same view my father had studied for 30 years. Now it was mine to protect. Arthur sat across the desk from me, slightly uncomfortable in his chair in a way that had nothing to do with the furniture. "You clean up well," I told him. He laughed quietly and pulled at his collar. The trial had moved faster than expected. Victor's confession and Lydia's full testimony removed any reasonable defense my husband could mount. The brake line, photographs, and financial records confirmed every material fact of the case. My husband was sentenced to 22 years. He had said nothing in court, not a single word, no speech, no final attempt to rebuild his story. Just silence, and then the sound of a door closing behind him. Arthur looked slowly around the office. "What comes next for this place?" he asked. "Rebuilding," I said. "Properly this time." He nodded approvingly. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "You know what strikes me most about all of this?" he said. "What?" He spent months planning every detail: the mechanic, the inspector, the insurance, the timing. He shook his head. "And he never once considered that you would simply survive." I looked out at the city below. "Most people don't," I said quietly, "plan for the woman they underestimated to walk back through the door." He smiled once and left me to my city. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Don't forget to subscribe. There are many more powerful stories of betrayal, survival, and justice coming soon.